Hey, welcome back to Soda Pop Culture with Scott and Matt. I'm Matt.
I'm Scott. Nice to see you guys.
Yeah.
Fun subject this week. Fun subject, near and dear to my heart, Matt.
Oh, excellent. So what could it possibly be that could be so near and so dear to
Yes,
a
yes.
Coke man's heart?
Brown sugary liquid. That's right.
Yes.
And this is one of those, that remember in the class we talk about the convergence of pop culture and consumer products, and where sometimes consumer products influence a movement in pop culture, and sometimes pop culture influences sort of what consumer products do. This is one that's actually a little bit of both, because it's about a famous commercial in 1971, which predates most of everybody who would be watching on this, but perhaps not everyone, called Hilltop.
Talking on this.
Called Hilltop. And people who may not know it as the famous 1971 Coca-Cola Hilltop ad would know, if they were around then, would know it by the song, "I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony. I'd like to buy the world a Coke." Anyway, so that was shot on a hilltop in Rome, which is why it's called Hilltop. And it was, seminal and iconic, and one of only two ads that the Coca-Cola company owns outright. As you know, I mean, advertising costs a lot of money, and you typically pay the talent and or the music and or the athlete or whoever it is for a specific period of time to use the ad. And then if you want to use it after that, you have to pay them again, which is why you don't often see ads being used over a longer period of time, because it gets expensive if you have talent and or music in the ad. Well, this is an ad that had both, but because it was so iconic, it's one of two ads that the company bought perpetual rights forever. In other words, paid everybody off who was in the ad or a part of the ad so that they could own it and never have to pay anybody again. So it was that iconic. Actually ended up donating the original copies, or a copy, to the Library of Congress at the Library of Congress's request. So cool. That iconic. The other one, by the way, just parenthetically, is the Mean Joe Green ad, right? So those are the two that they own.
Well, I mean, if you're going to own two, those are the most classic of classic.
Sure, exactly right. So
thanks, Mean Joe.
Thanks, throw the jersey, which would be another great subject. But so so it happened 1971. I remember hearing it, all over when I was a little kid, right here in Brunswick, Georgia. And it became iconic. And then, like anything else, it just sort of passes and starts to collect dust on a shelf.
Yeah.
Until 2015. Well, what happened in 2015? It was an interesting confluence of things. So this is where culture, certainly the Vietnam War in 1971, and the sort of the vestiges of racial tensions and those sorts of things led into this wonderful sort of iconic ad. And I'll show you sort of some stills of it from whoops, I was going to show you some stills of it, and I need to go to my share screen. So just talk amongst yourselves. There you go.
So Rhode Island is neither a road nor an island. Discuss.
So there it is. So these are these stills, and if you see these, it looks very period correct, right? Very sort of 1970s. And so the idea behind the ad, and it's easy to find, you can Google it and all these sorts of things, is Coca-Cola assembling a group of young people from around the world, male, female, different races, nationalities, which seems sort of very typical nowadays, but was not at all typical in the late 60s and early 70s. It wasn't too far before this in 1971 that Coke was pioneering and progressive, because it had young Black men and young white men sitting on the same bench at a bus station together, just talking, right? It's not that they didn't market to African-American people, but they had ads with Black folks in them and they had ads with white folks in them, but you very rarely had an integrated one. So this was relatively still new, and it had Asian and African and Hispanic and Anglo, and everyone was represented on this hilltop in Rome as they sang, "I'd like to teach the world to sing, I'd like to buy the world a Coke." It was this peaceful, harmonious sort of thing, right? The song itself became a big hit on the radio, so it crossed over. So it was all these aspects of culture that informed this commercial product, and then it itself became sort of symbolic and an icon. So that whole sort of pop culture creating a consumer product moment, and then consumer product sort of capturing the essence of that and creating more pop culture. And then it went, like all things do, into a little trough, and people forgot about it until 2015, when the show Mad Men, award-winning show about an advertising agency, and specifically
it did all right. And it only won a lot of awards.
Right. Emmys and the like, so 7 seasons, 92 episodes on AMC, and critically acclaimed, and about, in essence, the evolution of the advertising industry from the 60s into the 70s, and all of the as personified by Don Draper, this character played by John Hamm in the very successful series. So flash forward to a day in 2015, in early 2015, when I got a call from a lady named Wendy Clark, who runs one of the larger ad agencies in the world right now, but at the time was responsible for, among many other things, all of the creative executions for the Coca-Cola company, as an employee at Coke. And she called me and said, "Hey, got something I want to bounce off of you." So I went upstairs, talked to Wendy, and Wendy said, "Matthew Weiner, do you know him?" And I'm like, I don't. Obviously, I'm not real familiar with him. She said, "Well, he's the creator, executive producer of this award-winning show, Mad Men." I'm like, "Oh yeah, I know Mad Men." Well, they run for 7 seasons. They're doing 92 episodes. They have done 92 episodes. He's reached out to us because he has asked if we would consider letting him use the Hilltop ad for the last episode of Mad Men.
Yeah.
And I said, well, like any good public affairs communications person would, I said, use it how? Right? Like, what's the context? Is it going to be disparaging of it? Is it going to sort of lampoon it, or is it going to be supportive of it? And she said, he won't say. He won't tell us. We just need to trust him. He said he's always admired it, and he wants to use it. And she said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I mean, what do you think?" And she said, "Well, we have to decide." So I and she and others made the decision that we would sort of kind of roll the dice and let him use the ad. And so what happened was not anything like we expected would happen, but we waited and we waited and we waited, and we all tuned in to watch.
Oh yeah. I'm sure it was like each commercial break, everybody's texting each other.
What's going on? Why is we not see? Is it not going to be in there? Oh my gosh, what have we done? This is a huge mistake. I want no part in this. So
just take my name off of any credit. Wait, what? Yeah.
So what happened was that the last episode, the 92nd and last of the 7 seasons, was him, the character, in a sense, trying to sort of rediscover himself, get his mojo back, whatever you want to call it. And he'd gone out to the West Coast to meditate and that sort of thing. And this last scene of this last episode of this last season is of the character, and I'll flip over to it. I think I'll flip over to it. There it is. Sitting on a hillside on a rocky, as you can see, sort of peninsula there, overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and meditating with the people in his meditation class or his yoga class. And this is the very, 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 very end of the show. And we're thinking, well, what's happening? Nothing's going to happen. I mean, I guess we're just not going to be in. Coca-Cola, it was one of many clients, quote unquote, that the character serviced over the course of the 7 years. So it sort of popped up from time to time. Yeah. So we thought, okay, well, it must not be in it. Matthew Weiner, the creator and executive producer, made the decision that this image on the screen would be the next to the last thing that you saw, was him meditating. And then you heard a ding.
Yeah.
And then
it's like that light bulb going off.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That moment of illumination. And then the last scene of the last episode of the last year of Mad Men was the Hilltop ad. Ran the Hilltop ad, 60-second version of it. So communicating a whole host of things, which touched off just a firestorm of questions and controversy and what did this mean? All the Mad Men fans were like, what did it mean? Are they saying that Don Draper created the Coke, the famous Hilltop ad? Are they saying that is it a metaphor for something? Has he truly found himself and he is at peace and he wanted to reflect that? Or is it just a cynical sort of ploy to sell more, Coca-Cola beverages? That all came afterwards. But the crescendo moment of that entire series was this image followed by the Hilltop Coke ad, not a reimagination of it, not anything, but just the ad as the final moment of that entire award-winning series. So we didn't know what to think. We thought, oh my gosh, this is incredible. Look at all this exposure. Look at all this stuff we're getting. Phone started ringing the next day. Matthew Weiner did a Q&A with the New York Times, the first and I believe perhaps only one where he was going to address the subject of this. And talked about how much he admired the ad and how in keeping it was with the evolution of the character, and talked about a lot of interesting things that you can find there in New York Times in May of 2015. But just a really interesting example of a period of time in the late 60s and early 70s in our culture that begat the Hilltop ad, which then went quiet and then begat this idea of this final scene, which in and of itself spun off a whole other generation of appreciation for that ad. Just a fascinating sort of life cycle of popular culture influencing a consumer product, which influences popular culture, which influences a consumer product. This almost wave-like pop culture experience, which is just really continues to be fascinating to so many folks. So, and we spent the better part of the next 48 hours after the show fielding calls. How much did you pay? Did you give him permission? The reality was that we didn't pay anything. He wanted to pay, homage to the spot, and it touched off just a whole other sort of, round of exploration and curiosity around what was an iconic ad from 30-something years before.
Well, and the thing about this that strikes me is that, no offense to like Coke and your position at the time, but if you were the one who was giving input on how to use it, it might not have been nearly as great as the surprise of like you sitting there going, son of a, they did it.
Yeah.
I mean, because really, when we're looking, I'm thinking of iconic shows and endings. MASH, I mean, most watched finale ever. We only had 3 channels, kids. It's weird. Sopranos,
right?
Which again, he was a part of.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That ambiguous like ending where, wait, what?
Yeah.
And it's still talked about.
Yeah, he being Matthew Weiner. Yeah. Being involved.
You can't buy and direct somebody to pay homage to you in such a way.
Right.
That
it's a really good point. It's one of those, so sort of who gets credit? Well, who gets credit for it happening? Well, you have to go back to, this is the idea that there's no substitute for great content, right? I mean, so what compelled the creators of Mad Men to want to use this iconic ad as literally the bow on top of the final present gift to the American people who loved the show so much? What compelled that was work that was done by Bill Backer at McCann Erickson and the people who wrote that famous song for this ad 30 years before, right? I mean, there's very rarely, it existed in and of itself in its own time, and you can't say I just created an iconic ad. No, time and history and people decide that for you. You don't get to decide it for yourself. And entering the public consciousness in such a way such that 3 decades later, someone who became well known in Hollywood would remember it and say, based on the show that I created and the 7 seasons that I've done, I can't think of a better way to end it than with this thing that I, me speaking as if I'm him, remember from when I was a young person.
Yeah. And I mean, we also got to give you credit because you could have said no.
Well, I may well have been overridden, but yeah, but there was a look. I mean, I think he did. We understood the power of the show. We understood to the degree that we could what the character was all about, and some really wise people within the business said, this if we're going to take sort of calculated, educated risks.
This is a sure shot.
Yeah, this ad exists because of that time period. This is a show about that time period. The person who is asking for that kind of permission is someone of high integrity and incredible talent. Yeah. And we're gonna do it. And yeah, I raised my hand, yes, as did a lot of other folks. But
not like they were asking to use new Coke.
Right, because that would never work unless you're Jeff Cottrell talking about Stranger Things and as well, which folks, make sure you check out that episode as well.
But as much as this song and everything was part of a period, I remember it from my childhood too. Sure. They didn't show the commercial as much, but the song and the everything else kind of lent itself, which I guess is because Coke owned it. Yeah, kind of like how Chevy was lucky enough to have Bob Seger donate Like a Rock.
Like a Rock, sure. And it becomes
everything for them. So iconic.
Right. And it becomes the jingle, and I encourage everybody to go. It's very easy to find. You can go on YouTube and see this spot, and you can hear the song. And even now, it has the hook. It's to the current generation. They look at it and it sounds a little sappy. It sounds a little cynical. Yeah. But keep in mind what was going on then. I mean, there was a very controversial war. Young people were being killed on both sides. It was not popular. There was significant sort of racial tension and inequity that was being addressed or not addressed, and so all of that lent itself to this moment of, I'd like to buy the world a home, furnish it with love, grow apple trees and honeybees, snow white turtle doves. I'd like to buy the world a Coke, right? I'd like to just do something simple, which we could all unite around.
Lack of thoughts. The world was a bigger place then.
Sure.
And by that, I mean, you didn't quite understand different cultures the same way.
Right.
You can find out now.
Yep.
We have the internet. We can watch these Korean TV shows on Netflix and, get a glimpse into stuff.
Yep.
Back then, this really was a big global campaign. It was very successful. It was very awesome.
Yeah, indeed. And one that for its time it's sort of a time capsule, right? I mean, you go back and watch this and you can sort of watch the ad and you can go, yeah, that's just oozes 1971, right?
Especially the hair and makeup.
Sure.
You just kind of
exactly right. And the idealism of youth and those kinds of things. So it's a fast. I don't know of another example of something that is such a cultural touchstone for a specific period of time.
Yeah.
That was then sort of resurrected and used in a creative way to tell a story from that time, which sort of repopularized it, if you will. The other thing I was going to mention is that the song then, which was written by the ad agency creatives, was then released as a single without the line, "I'd like to buy the world a Coke." They pull that part out. And so you had this double-barreled sort of marketing plan so that the radio stations began to air it as a single. Yeah. The ad continued to run using it with the line, "I'd like to buy the world a Coke."
It was inseparable, but because you took out the buy a Coke, all of a sudden it was like, all right, well, we'll play this in the middle of the tunes. Not a big deal.
Exactly right. So then and each thing fed the other, right? So it became a really popular single because people remembered the commercial and liked the commercial, and then they heard the radio song, which didn't include the line, but then that caused them to think about Coke, right? So it just sort of, I remember there's very few songs I remember from 1971. This is one, and then I think Cracklin' Rosie from Neil Diamond, I remember as a kid, right? So, but
hey, it was great live. I'm just putting it out there.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. I never got to see Neil Diamond.
In Detroit,
live.
it was a fantastic show. No shame here.
Hey, you talk about icons. I mean,
yeah,
come on, Neil Diamond. So yeah, just a really neat one, a really neat example of something that was both cultural touchstone and consumer product focused, and cultural touchstone with the Mad Men show, which became consumer product again.
What did Coke do after this to capitalize off of?
Yeah, it's good.
Did they re-air the Hilltop?
Yeah.
Did they refilm it?
No, it's the ad has been sort of quote revisited in the past. I think a few years after this, in the mid 70s, there was and the idea of it, the concept, the thematic of it has been addressed in other Coca-Cola ads over the course of time. I think the as I recall, what we did to sort of quote unquote leverage the we made the wise decision to just let it run, right? To let the conversation, America took over, Mad Men fans took over, critics and the like on message boards and articles. And if you go and Google again, New York Times, Slate, CNN, everyone was covering the question.
Yeah, breaking down. Well, what was Don thinking?
Right. The final episode of the very successful 7-year run became as much about why did Weiner include Hilltop as it did about what did you think about the final episode in general.
Oh yeah. When you have a commercial from 1971 become the focus of debate,
right,
and not in a bad way. It wasn't like Game of Thrones ending where everybody's like, well, screw this sucked.
I'm angry. Right.
People were not angry with the ending.
Right. I mean, there was why this versus that. But at the end of the day, to answer your question, sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best thing you can do is to look at it and say, just as Coca-Cola is not owned by the Coca-Cola company, Coca-Cola, the idea is owned by, the people who have embraced it over 120, 130 years.
Yeah.
And this moment is not our moment. It's the confluence of this show and this creator, Matthew Weiner, and this ad and this brand. Let's just let them do what they want to do with it. And then I think we did a post, on our website that sort of re-educated people about the history of it and that sort of thing, so that it would be available to people to go search who had never seen the ad before and wanted to know the history of it. But that's pretty much the extent of it. And then we just let it run.
Knowing that it was going to be in there, I'm assuming you did that pre-airing of the show.
I'd like to say that we were that sort of clairvoyant and said, boy, we're going to need to know all that. So yeah, we did a lot of thinking about it. And again, the ad was in and of itself historical and popular and iconic, and had been donated to Library of Congress and that sort of thing. So that stuff already existed. It was just essentially it wasn't me who was doing that, but our internal executive communications people who were then sort of repackaging it for easy consumption by people who were looking for it or searching for it for the first time because of the show itself.
Yeah, and I mean, you got the link right there.
Yes, there it is. That's right.
Yeah.
Creating I like to buy the world of Coke.
To buy the world of Coke.
Because that was a lot of people were saying, "Wow, is that a real Coke ad? Did Don Draper actually create that?" And so we were able to point them back to this pre-existing story about how that iconic ad was created. So super fun.
Yeah, I just having recently watched the final episode, it just kind of fit with the whole thing. I like that little scene. He's sitting there meditating. I'm sitting there going, what the hell? And you were like, just trust me. And I'm like, all right. And the ding and that little smirk
Right,
right before they cut right to that.
right.
It was better than the Sopranos ending.
Yeah,
That's
it was.
just me.
It was right after this, a moment after this. And if you go back and look at that whole episode,
Yeah.
look at some of the images here you see of this young lady with the red ponytail, with the ponytails with the red ribbon.
Yeah.
You go back and look at that episode. There are shots, like on a little Easter egg that Weiner left. There are shots when they pull back and look at the larger group of people that he is there meditating with. There's a shot of right before that of a young lady with red ribbons in her hair.
Yeah.
Which I just sort of feeding that idea. Was he sitting up there, and did this idea come to him as a confluence of what he was experiencing and meditating and being on a hill, and this ad being on a hill, and seeing these people and seeing the ribbons and the idea coming, right? So and he has always been really sort of cagey about all the aspects of it. But there's an Easter egg or two in that last episode. If you go back and look at it, like, that's interesting that he had that. It's interesting he used that camera angle there. Interesting he used that red ribbon there,
It's
because
very
of what
meta.
you see.
I mean, having a pop culture influenced commercial inside of a TV show, which focuses back on the pop culture
Right.
and become its own thing. And
Right.
it's very,
Right.
very neat.
Yeah, super cool. A lot of fun, and an enjoyable thing to have experienced and sort of watched from the inside, at least a little bit, back in 2015. This is a fun one, Matt. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. I'm just a little shocked y'all didn't like put up a big screen and like corporate and have a big viewing party for the final episode of.
Oh, so we didn't know what was coming.
I don't know.
It could've
I
been
guess
bad.
that would have been a little awkward if it sucked. Am I right?
They could have walked up and said, "Everybody, raise your hand if you were part of this. You're all fired." Yeah, no, you don't want that. You don't want that. You don't want that either. Just take the credit after the fact.
Yeah, walk in, expect a slow clap, right? Yeah.
Exactly right.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Scott. This was a good one.
Enjoyed it. See you
All
soon.
right. Bye.